The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of the neighborhood. It was one of those days in early fall when the air feels crisp, but not cold, and the leaves on the trees had just started to turn, some golden, some red, others still holding tight to summer green. A boy, no older than 12, walked home from school with his backpack slung over one shoulder, scuffing his worn-out sneakers against the pavement. His school day had been long, like most days lately, and all he wanted was to get home, drop his bag, and maybe sneak in a few minutes of his favorite video game before dinner. He wasn't in a rush. In fact, he liked these walks. They gave him time to think, to replay moments from the day, to imagine what life might be like when he was older. Maybe a mechanic, maybe a teacher, maybe something he hadn't even heard of yet. His mind wandered as he passed the corner store, the little park with the rusty swing set in Mrs. Langley's house, where her tabby cat always sat on the porch like a tiny furry statue. Then, something caught his eye near the curb just ahead, a glint of silver against the gray concrete. At first he thought it might be a piece of trash, maybe a bottle cap or a crumpled gum wrapper. But as he got closer, he saw it was a pair of eyeglasses. Not the cheap kind you'd find in a drugstore, but the kind with thin metal frames and lenses that looked thick in the middle, like they were made for someone who really needed them to see clearly. He stopped and crouched down. The glasses were lying half on the sidewalk, half in the gutter, like they'd been dropped in a hurry. The case was nearby, slightly cracked but still holding together with a small leather tag attached. He picked it up gently, careful not to smudge the lenses. Flipping open the case, he saw an engraving on the inside. Dr. Alan Whitmore, Precision Vision Care. He knew that name. There was an eye doctor's office just a few blocks away near the pharmacy. His mom had taken him there once, years ago, for a school vision screening. He remembered the quiet waiting room, the posters about eye health on the walls, and how the doctor had spoken in a calm, steady voice that made you feel like everything would be okay. Now, holding these glasses, he felt a little knot of worry in his stomach. If these belonged to that doctor, then losing them must have been a big deal. Grown-ups didn't just drop expensive things like this and walk away. Maybe the doctor had been rushing to a patient, or maybe he'd been distracted by something important. Either way, someone was probably upset, maybe even in trouble because they couldn't see properly without them. The boy stood up, turning the case over in his hands. He could just leave them there. Someone else might find them, or maybe the owner would come back looking. But something inside him, something his mom always called doing the right thing when no one's watching, told him that wasn't enough. If he walked away now, he'd wonder all night if those glasses were still lying in the gutter, getting stepped on or washed away by rain. He glanced toward home. His mom wouldn't be back from work for a few more hours. She worked as a home health aide, helping elderly people with their daily needs, bathing, cooking, taking medicine. She often came home exhausted, her feet swollen, her voice tired. Still, she always made sure dinner was ready, homework was checked, and his little sister had her bedtime story. She didn't have time for detours or delays, and they definitely didn't have money to waste. But this wasn't about money. It was about helping someone who needed it. He made up his mind. He'd take the glasses to the eye doctor's office tomorrow after school. It wasn't far, just a 10-minute walk past the library and the bakery that always smelled like cinnamon. He slipped the case into his backpack, zipping it carefully so it wouldn't rattle around. As he walked the rest of the way home, he felt a quiet kind of pride, the kind that doesn't need applause or reward. It was enough just to know he'd tried. At home, his little sister was already at the kitchen table, coloring in a notebook with crayons that were mostly worn down to stubs. She looked up and grinned when he came in. "You're late," she said, but not in a mean way, just stating a fact. Like the sky was blue or cookies were better than broccoli. "Had to make a stop," he said, shrugging off his backpack. "Did you find treasure?" she asked, eyes wide. "Kind of," he smiled. "Someone lost something important. I'm gonna give it back." She nodded seriously as if this made perfect sense. Kids understood fairness better than most adults gave them credit for. Later that evening, after dinner of reheated soup and buttered bread, his mom sat at the table rubbing her temples. She looked more tired than usual. "Car's making that noise again," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "I don't know how much longer it'll last." He didn't say anything, but he felt that familiar weight in his chest, the one that came from wanting to fix things but not knowing how. They'd been saving for new tires for months, but every time they got close, something else came up, a bill, a school fee, medicine for his sister's asthma. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant sound of a train whistle, he thought about the glasses again. Maybe returning them wouldn't change anything in his own life, but maybe, just maybe, it would matter to someone else. And sometimes that was enough. He fell asleep with the case still in his backpack, tucked safely beside his math textbook and a half-eaten granola bar. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the last warmth of the day into the cool night. Somewhere, a man was squinting through blurry eyes, wondering where his glasses had gone. And a boy, ordinary in every way except his choices, was already planning to make things right, without expecting a single thing in return. The next morning came faster than expected. The boy woke to the sound of his little sister humming off-key in the hallway while brushing her teeth, a habit she'd picked up from their mom, who always sang while doing chores, even when she was dead tired. He rolled out of bed, pulled on the same jeans from yesterday, they were clean enough, and double-checked his backpack. The glasses case was still there, right where he'd left it, nestled between his science notebook and a crumpled permission slip for the upcoming field trip. Breakfast was quick, cereal with slightly warm milk, because the fridge had been acting up again, but he didn't mind. His mind was already on the walk ahead. After school let out, instead of heading straight home like usual, he turned left at the corner and started toward the eye doctor's office. The sun was higher now, warm on his back, and the streets were quieter in the afternoon lull between school ending and evening rush. He rehearsed what he'd say in his head. "Hi, I found these glasses yesterday." Simple, honest, no need to make it fancy. He wasn't looking for praise, just to do what felt right. The clinic was exactly as he remembered, a small brick building with big windows and a sign that read, "Precision Vision Care," in neat silver letters. A few potted plants sat by the entrance, looking well kept but not showy. He pushed the door open and a soft chime sounded overhead. Inside, the waiting room was calm. A woman in her 60s flipped through a magazine. Another tapped quietly on her phone. The air smelled faintly of coffee and hand sanitizer. Behind the front desk, a receptionist looked up with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" He stepped forward, suddenly feeling a little shy. He unzipped his backpack slowly, pulled out the case, and placed it on the counter. "I found these yesterday near Maple and Fifth," he said, voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "There's a name inside, Dr. Whitmore." The receptionist's eyes widened. She took the case, opened it, and let out a soft gasp. "Oh my goodness. These are his." She looked up at the boy like he'd just handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Dr. Whitmore canceled 2 surgeries yesterday because he couldn't see without these. He's been frantic." Before he could respond, a door opened behind the desk and a man in a white coat stepped out. He was in his late 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, different ones, clearly a backup pair, and a tired but gentle expression. "What's going on, Linda?" he asked. The receptionist turned. "Dr. Whitmore, this young man just brought back your glasses. The ones you lost yesterday." The doctor's face changed instantly. Relief, gratitude, maybe even a little disbelief. He walked around the counter and crouched slightly so he was at eye level with the boy. "You found these?" he asked, voice soft. The boy nodded. "Near the storm drain. They looked expensive. I figured you'd need them." "You have no idea," the doctor said, shaking his head. "I was rushing between appointments, must have dropped them getting out of the car. I've been using these old ones all day. They're not strong enough. I couldn't even read my notes properly." He stood up and reached into his pocket, pulling out a $20 bill. "Please take this. You've saved me a lot of trouble, and my patients too." The boy hesitated. He wasn't used to being offered money, especially not for something that felt so small. He thought of his mom's words, the ones she repeated like a quiet mantra. Doing good doesn't need a price. He shook his head gently. "No, thank you. I just wanted to return them." The doctor paused, studying him. Not with suspicion, but with something deeper. Respect, maybe. "You're sure?" "Yeah," the boy said, shifting his weight. "It's okay." Dr. Whitmore smiled, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "Well, I won't forget this. Tell you what, how about I give you a free eye exam sometime, just in case you ever need one?" And if you or your family ever need anything at all, you come see me, all right?" The boy nodded, not quite knowing what to say. He wasn't used to adults looking at him like he mattered. Most grown-ups barely notice kids unless they were causing trouble or asking for something. "All right then," the doctor said warmly. "You take care of yourself." Back outside, the boy blinked in the sunlight, feeling a little lighter. He hadn't expected anything to happen. Just drop off the glasses and go. But something about the way the doctor had looked at him, the sincerity in his voice, made him feel seen in a way he rarely did. He walked home slowly, kicking a pebble along the sidewalk. His little sister would be waiting, probably already asking their mom why he was late again, but for once he didn't mind being late. He felt like he'd done something real, something that actually helped someone, even if it was just one person. At home, his mom was just getting in from her afternoon shift. Her shoes were off by the door, her uniform wrinkled, but she smiled when she saw him. "Hey, you're back. How was school?" "Good," he said, dropping his backpack by the couch. "I stopped by the eye doctor's on the way." She raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay with your eyes?" No, he said quickly. "I found a pair of glasses yesterday. They belonged to the doctor. I took them back." Her expression softened. She didn't say much. She never did when it came to things like this. But she reached out and ruffled his hair, the way she used to when he was little. "That was kind of you," she said simply. And that was enough. Later that night, as he lay in bed listening to the hum of the neighborhood settling into darkness, he thought about the doctor's offer. A free eye exam. It sounded nice, but they'd be fine. They always were. His eyes worked just fine. He could read the board at school, spot a baseball from across the field, see the worry lines on his mom's face when bills came in the mail. He didn't need anything. And that was okay. What he didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that the doctor hadn't just been grateful. He'd been moved, deeply. In a world where people often kept to themselves, where kindness sometimes felt like a rare currency, a kid choosing to do the right thing without expecting anything back had struck a chord. Dr. Whitmore stayed up late that night, not working on patient files, but thinking. He remembered the boy's worn backpack, the quiet way he spoke, the refusal of the money. He wondered about his family, his life, whether they had what they needed. He made a mental note to ask the receptionist if she knew anything, discreetly, respectfully. Not out of curiosity, but concern. Meanwhile, the boy slept soundly, unaware that a single act, small, simple, almost forgettable, had already started something much bigger than he could imagine. Life would go on as usual for now. School, chores, helping his sister with her spelling words, listening to his mom hum while she washed dishes. But somewhere a seed had been planted, and sometimes seeds take root in the most unexpected soil. The next morning the sun rose just like any other day. But for two people, one young, one older, something had quietly shifted, not with fanfare or drama, but with the quiet power of a choice made in kindness. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of what came next. Weeks passed like pages turning in a book no one was rushing to finish. The boy went back to his usual rhythm, school in the morning, homework in the afternoon, helping his little sister tie her shoes before she ran out the door for her own class. Life didn't change overnight, and he didn't expect it to. Returning the glasses had felt right, but it wasn't something he dwelled on. It was just one of those things you did and moved on from, like holding the door open for someone or picking up litter when you saw it. At home, things stayed the same, steady but strained. The old family car, a silver sedan with more dents than paint, had started making a new noise. A low groan every time it turned left, like it was tired of pretending everything was fine. His mom tried to ignore it at first, but after a particularly rough morning, when the car stalled twice on the way to her first client's house, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at a stack of bills like they might rearrange themselves into something manageable. "We'll figure it out," she said, when he asked if they needed to call a mechanic. Her voice was calm, but her hands were tight around the mug. Just not this week. He knew what that meant. Not this week usually meant not ever, unless something unexpected happened, like a tax refund or an extra shift that paid double. But those were rare. Most days they lived paycheck to paycheck, stretching every dollar like taffy until it nearly snapped. He started mowing lawns on weekends again, knocking on neighbors' doors with a slightly too big push mower he'd borrowed from Mr. Ruiz next door. $2 here, 3 there. Enough for a pack of pencils or a new notebook, maybe even a treat from the corner store if he saved up long enough. He didn't complain. He'd seen his mom work through fevers, through rainstorms, through nights when she came home so quiet. He knew she'd been crying in the car before walking in the door. If she could do that, he could push a mower for an hour. School kept him busy too. Math was getting harder, and his science teacher had assigned a project on renewable energy that required poster board and colored markers, things they didn't have at home. He stayed after class one day to ask if he could use the school's supplies. The teacher, Ms. Patel, nodded without hesitation. "Of course," she said, handing him a fresh sheet of poster board. "You're always so thoughtful with your work." He didn't tell her that thoughtful was just another word for careful. Careful not to waste paper. Careful not to break pencils. Careful not to ask for things they couldn't afford. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Whitmore hadn't forgotten. In fact, he'd thought about the boy more than once. There was something about the quiet dignity in his refusal of the money. The way he'd stood there with his scuffed shoes and faded backpack, not expecting anything in return. It reminded the doctor of his own childhood, growing up in a small apartment with a single mom who worked 3 jobs and still made time to read him stories at night. One afternoon, during a slow moment between patients, he casually asked his receptionist, Linda, if she knew anything about the boy's family. "Just curious," he said, trying to sound casual. He seemed like a good kid. "I wonder how they're doing." Linda, who'd lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, tilted her head. "I think his mom works as a home health aide. Lives over on Elm, in that little blue house with the white shutters." "You know the one?" Dr. Whitmore did. He'd driven past it 100 times. Modest, well-kept, but clearly not easy street. He nodded slowly. Thanks, he didn't pry further. But that night after dinner with his wife, he mentioned the boy. "There's this kid," he said, stirring his coffee. "Found my glasses, brought them all the way back. Didn't want a dime, just did it because it was right." His wife listened quietly, then said, "People like that are rare, especially kids." "They shouldn't have to be," he replied. Over the next few days, Dr. Whitmore made a few quiet calls, not to dig into anyone's business, but to see if there was a way to help without overstepping. He reached out to a friend who managed a local auto repair shop. He asked about reliable used cars, ones that wouldn't break the bank but would last a few good years. He also called a colleague who worked with a community foundation that supported families in need. Nothing official, just gentle inquiries like testing the water. But he didn't act yet. He wanted to be sure. He didn't want to embarrass the boy or his family. Help, he believed, should feel like a hand up, not a spotlight. Back in the boy's world, autumn deepened. Leaves piled up in the gutters and the air turned sharper in the mornings. One Saturday, he woke to the sound of his mom on the phone, her voice low and urgent. "I know," she was saying, "but I can't miss another day. Mrs. Delgado depends on me." He stayed in bed, listening. He knew Mrs. Delgado. She was one of his mom's oldest clients, a woman in her 90s who lived alone and couldn't walk without help. If his mom didn't show up, Mrs. Delgado might not eat, might not take her medicine. But if the car broke down on the way, later that morning his mom came into his room, already dressed for work. "Hey," she said softly, "I'm going to try to get the car looked at this week. Maybe Mr. Ruiz can take a look under the hood." He nodded. "I'll help," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You always do." That afternoon, while his sister played outside with a jump rope, he sat on the porch steps and watched the street. Nothing fancy ever happened here, just mail trucks, school buses, the occasional dog walker. He liked that. Predictable. Safe. He didn't dream of luxury cars or big houses. He just wanted his mom to come home without that tired look in her eyes. He wanted the car to start every morning without coughing like it was sick. He didn't know it, but someone was already working to make that happen. Dr. Whitmore, after weeks of quiet planning, had found a solution. Through a connection at a luxury car dealership, one that occasionally donated gently used vehicles to community members in need, he'd arranged something special. Not a handout, but a bridge. 2 cars, both recently traded in, both in excellent condition, both ready to go. One for daily use, one as a backup. Fully serviced, insured for 6 months with no strings attached. He hadn't told anyone, not even his wife, the full plan, because he wanted to be sure it would work. And more than that, he wanted it to feel natural when it happened. No speeches, no cameras, just kindness, delivered quietly like the boy had done with the glasses. But for now, life went on as usual in the little blue house. The boy helped his sister with her math homework. His mom came home late, her feet aching but smiling because Mrs. Delgado had baked her a slice of apple pie, just because. They ate dinner together under the soft glow of the kitchen light, talking about nothing important. The weather, a funny thing the neighbor's dog did, a song on the radio. No one suspected that change was coming. Not the loud, flashy kind, but the deep, steady kind. The kind that lifts a family just enough to breathe again. And the boy? He still carried the memory of returning those glasses. Not as a big deal, but as a reminder. Sometimes, doing the right thing is its own reward. He had no idea that his reward was already on its way. It was a Saturday morning like any other. Quiet, slow, with the kind of stillness that only comes when the week is over and no one's in a hurry. The boy was out front raking leaves into a big pile near the curb. His little sister sat on the porch steps drawing chalk pictures on the sidewalk. Mostly rainbows and cats with too many legs, and humming a song she'd made up that morning. Their mom was inside, catching up on laundry, the washing machine thumping softly in the background like a steady heartbeat. The air smelled like damp earth and fallen leaves, and the sun was warm enough to make the chore feel almost pleasant. He didn't mind raking. It gave him time to think, and sometimes, if he worked fast enough, he'd get a few extra minutes of free time before lunch. Then he heard it. The low rumble of an engine that didn't belong. Not the usual neighbor's pickup or the mail truck, but something smoother, deeper. He looked up just as a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of their house. It gleamed in the sunlight, polished and quiet, like it had never known a pothole or a rainy day. Before he could even process what he was seeing, another car pulled up behind it. A silver sedan, just as clean, just as out of place on their street. His rake hovered midair. His sister stopped drawing and stood up, eyes wide. "Who's that?" she whispered, stepping closer to him. The driver's door of the SUV opened and out stepped Dr. Whitmore. But he wasn't alone. Beside him was a man in a press shirt and slacks, holding a clipboard and smiling like he was delivering good news, which, as it turned out, he was. The boy's heart started thumping. He hadn't seen the doctor since that day at the clinic weeks ago. Why was he here? Had something gone wrong? Did they think he'd taken something? His mind raced, but he stayed where he was, rake still in hand, watching as the two men walked toward the house. Dr. Whitmore saw him right away. His face broke into a warm smile. "Hey there," he called out, voice calm and friendly. "Hope we're not interrupting." The boy shook his head, suddenly aware that his hands were dirty and his shirt had a grass stain on the sleeve. "No, sir," he managed. His mom must have heard the cars too, because the front door opened and she stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked confused, then cautious, then surprised when she recognized the doctor. "Dr. Whitmore? Is everything all right?" "Everything's more than all right," the doctor said gently. He glanced at the boy, then back at her. "Actually, we're here because of your son." Her eyes flicked to her child, full of questions. He just shrugged, as confused as she was. Dr. Whitmore took a breath. "A few weeks ago, your son found my glasses, the ones I'd lost near the storm drain. He walked them all the way to my office, refused any reward, and just wanted to make sure I got them back." He paused, his voice softening. "That kind of honesty. It stays with you." The boy looked down at his shoes. He hadn't thought much about it since. "It was just something you did. But that's not why we're here today," the doctor continued. He gestured to the two cars behind him. "After I learned a little more about your situation, how hard you work, how much you give to others, and how your car's been giving you trouble, I reached out to a friend at a local dealership. These vehicles were recently traded in, fully inspected, and they're in excellent condition." He stepped aside slightly, letting the other man speak. "We've arranged for both cars to be donated to your family," the man said kindly. "One for your daily use, getting to your clients safely, and the other as a backup for school runs, errands, whatever you need. They're both insured for the next 6 months, registration's taken care of, and there's no payment, no lease, no strings." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the oak tree in the front yard and the distant bark of a dog down the street. The boy's mom stood frozen, one hand still on the doorframe. Her eyes filled with tears, Not sad ones, but the kind that come when something too good to believe actually happens. She looked at her son, then back at the cars, then at Dr. Whitmore. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, the doctor replied softly. Your son already said it all, with his actions. The boy finally found his voice. You're giving a cars? Not me, Dr. Whitmore said with a small smile. Life's giving you a little help back. And honestly, it's the least we could do. His little sister tugged on his sleeve. Are those ours now? She whispered, eyes shining. He nodded slowly, still trying to wrap his head around it. These weren't just any cars. They were the kind he'd only seen in magazines or driving past fancy neighborhoods. Clean, quiet, reliable. The kind that wouldn't stall on a cold, morning or groan when turning left. His mom walked down the steps, her slippers scuffing against the concrete. She stopped in front of Dr. Whitmore and without a word hugged him. Just a quick, tight hug, brief but full of everything she couldn't say out loud. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. Thank you, she said simply. From the bottom of my heart. Neighbors had started to notice. Mrs. Langley from across the street stood on her porch, hand over her mouth. Mr. Ruiz leaned over his fence, shaking his head in disbelief. No one said anything, but their faces said it all. This didn't happen on their street. Not ever. The dealership rep handed over 2 sets of keys. They're all yours, he said. We can walk you through everything. How the GPS works, the maintenance schedule, all that. But they're ready to drive today. The boy's mom took the keys like they were made of glass. Then she turned to her son and pulled him into a hug so tight he could feel her heartbeat. You did this, she whispered. You, he shook his head. I just gave back some glasses. But you did it because it was right, she said, pulling back to look at him. And sometimes, the world notices. Later that afternoon, after the doctor and the dealership man had left, after the neighbors had gone back inside, the family stood in the driveway together. The boy ran his hand along the smooth hood of the silver sedan, cool, solid, real. His sister climbed into the passenger seat and giggled, pretending to drive. His mom sat in the driver's seat of the SUV, adjusting the mirror, testing the seatbelt, her face calm for the first time in months. No one talked much. They didn't need to. The quiet joy was enough, that night, over a dinner that suddenly felt lighter. Maybe because they didn't have to worry about the car breaking down on the way to work tomorrow. They laughed more than they had in weeks. His mom even played a song on the old radio, the one that only worked if you held the antenna just right. And as the boy lay in bed that night, listening to the new unfamiliar silence, no groaning engine, no anxious whispers about repairs, he realized something. Kindness didn't always come back to you in the way you expected. Sometimes it arrived in the form of 2 cars on a quiet Saturday morning. Sometimes it showed up just when you needed it most, and sometimes all it took was one small choice, returning a pair of lost glasses, to set it all in motion. News travels fast in a neighborhood where everyone knows each other's routines. The mailman's wave, the bakery's morning rush, the sound of Mrs. Langley's wind chimes. So when 2 luxury cars showed up in the driveway of the little blue house on Elm Street, people noticed. At first it was just whispers over fences and curious glances from passing cars. But soon the story spread. A kid had returned a pair of lost glasses, and weeks later, the owner showed up with not 1, but 2 cars as thanks. It wasn't long before someone posted about it on the local community page. Not for fame, just because it felt like the kind of thing people needed to hear. Sometimes good still wins, the post read with a blurry photo of the cars parked side by side. Within hours it had hundreds of shares. Comments poured in. This restored my faith in people. We need more kids like this. What a beautiful act of kindness, on both sides. The boy didn't see any of it at first. He wasn't on social media, he was too young, and his mom didn't tell him right away, not wanting the attention to change him. But kids at school started talking. A teacher mentioned it during morning announcements, not naming him but saying, "Let's remember that small acts of honesty can lead to big things." He kept his head down, embarrassed more than proud. He hadn't done it for this. He'd done it because it felt right. Still, something shifted in the neighborhood after that. People started paying attention, not just to what was missing, but to what they could give. The local grocery store owner began leaving a basket by the register for spare change to help families with school supplies. A retired mechanic offered free oil changes for single parents. Even the kids got involved, organizing a kindness week at school where they wrote thank you notes to bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and crossing guards. The boy, without meaning to, had sparked something, but he didn't see himself as a leader. He just kept doing what he'd always done, helping his sister with homework, mowing lawns for extra cash, checking in on Mrs. Delgado when his mom was running late. Only now, when he walked down the street, neighbors smiled a little wider. Some even waved like he was someone special. He never corrected them. He just smiled back. Dr. Whitmore stayed in touch, not with grand gestures, but quiet ones. A note in the mail wishing them well. A call to check if the cars were running smoothly. Once he stopped by with a box of books for the boy. Non-fiction titles about engineering, space, and how things work. "Thought you might like these," he'd said simply. No fanfare, just care. As the months passed, life settled into a new kind of normal. The cars never broke down. The silver sedan became the school-run vehicle. The black SUV carried his mom safely to her clients, rain or shine. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about being stranded or late. She even started saving a little, just a few dollars a week, but it was enough to buy new shoes for her daughter and a proper winter coat for her son, and then came the scholarship. It arrived in a crisp envelope one spring afternoon, addressed to the boy. Dr. Whitmore had quietly nominated him for a local youth leadership award, and part of the prize included a small scholarship for high school and beyond. The letter said it was for demonstrating integrity, responsibility, and quiet courage. When his mom read it aloud at the kitchen table, her voice cracked on the last line. She didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of crier. But her hands trembled as she folded the paper back into the envelope. He didn't know what he wanted to be yet, but lately he'd been thinking about helping people, not just in small ways, but in real lasting ones, maybe studying social work, maybe becoming a counselor. He'd seen how hard life could be for folks who just needed a break, a hand, someone to believe in them, and he'd also seen how one act, just one, could ripple outward in ways no one expected. By the time summer rolled around, he'd started something of his own. With help from his school and a few neighbors, he launched a lost and found program for kids in the area. A bright blue bin sat outside the community center where children could drop off found items, mittens, water bottles, library books, and others could check if something they'd lost had turned up. He made flyers, posted them on bulletin boards, even convinced the local pizza shop to let him leave a stack by the door. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. And every time a kid came running back with their lost toy or jacket, grinning like they'd found treasure, he remembered that pair of glasses on the sidewalk, and how something small could matter more than you ever imagined. Years later, as he packed his bags for college, his first in the family to go, he stood in the driveway one last time before leaving. The cars were older now, but still running strong. His little sister, taller and bolder, teased him about forgetting his toothbrush. His mom hugged him tight, her eyes proud but sad, the way only a parent's can be. "You've always had a good heart," she whispered. "Don't ever lose that," he nodded. He wouldn't. At college, he majored in social work, just as he'd planned. He volunteered at shelters, tutored kids after class, and always made time to listen, really listen, when someone needed to talk. He never told his story unless asked, and even then he kept it simple. "I just gave back some glasses once. That's all." But those who knew him saw the truth. It wasn't just about the glasses. It was about choosing kindness when no one was watching. It was about believing that doing the right thing mattered, even if no one clapped, even if nothing changed right away. And in a world that often felt loud, rushed, and divided, that quiet belief became his compass. Back home, the blue bin outside the community center still stood, now a little faded but always full. Kids dropped off lost hats, pencils, even a pet hamster once it was returned safely. And every so often, an older kid would tell the story of the boy who returned a pair of glasses, and how it changed everything. Not with fireworks or fame, but with trust, with dignity, with 2 cars that showed up on a Saturday morning, and a family that finally got to breathe. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. And the most ordinary people, kids walking home from school, moms working double shifts, Doctors who remember what kindness feels like are the ones who keep the world turning, one good deed at a time. After all, the arc felt complete. A lost pair of glasses, a quiet act of honesty, an unexpected gift, a ripple of kindness through the neighborhood, and a young person stepping into a future built on integrity. That was enough. More than enough. But life doesn't always wrap up in neat chapters. Sometimes it keeps going, quietly, steadily, adding new layers to old moments, revealing connections no one saw coming. 5 years after the cars arrived, on a cool spring evening just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the boy, now a young man home from college for summer break, was walking his little sister's dog around the block. He'd taken the job partly out of habit, partly because he liked the rhythm of it, the tug of the leash, the sound of paws on pavement, the way the neighborhood looked different at dusk, softer somehow. He passed Mrs. Langley's house. Her wind chime still hung on the porch, though she'd moved to a retirement home last year. Mr. Ruiz waved from his driveway, still fixing cars at 72, still refusing to charge neighbors for oil changes. The community center's blue lost and found bin sat where it always had, now repainted by a group of middle schoolers as part of a service project. Everything felt familiar, comfortable, like a well-worn sweater. Then his phone buzzed. A text from his mom. Dr. Whitmore called. He's stopping by tomorrow. Says it's important. The young man frowned. The doctor still checked in every few months, holiday cards. A quick call to see how school was going, but important wasn't a word he used lightly. The next afternoon, right on time, a familiar black SUV pulled up, not the one they'd been given years ago. That one now sat in their driveway with 90,000 gentle miles on it, but a newer model. Dr. Whitmore stepped out, older now, his hair more silver than gray, but his smile just as warm. He didn't come alone. Beside him stood a teenager, maybe 16, with nervous eyes and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked around like he wasn't sure he belonged there. They sat at the kitchen table, mugs of tea steaming between them. His mom had baked oatmeal cookies, the kind Dr. Whitmore always liked. After a few minutes of easy talk, how college was going, how the cars were holding up, how Mrs. Delgado was doing, still baking pies at 95, the doctor leaned forward. "I didn't just come to visit," he said gently. He nodded toward the teenager. "This is my grandson." The boy, no, the young man, looked up surprised. He'd never known the doctor had family nearby. "My daughter lives in another state," Dr. Whitmore explained, "but he's spending the summer with me. And, well, he's been struggling a bit. School's been hard. He feels like no one sees him, like nothing he does matters." The teenager stared at his hands. "I messed up," he mumbled. "Not big stuff, just, I stopped trying." Dr. Whitmore didn't scold him. He just said, "I told him about you." The young man blinked. "Me?" "Yes," the doctor said. "About the day you walked into my office with my glasses. About how you didn't want anything in return. About how you kept doing the right thing even when no one was watching." He turned to his grandson. "I wanted him to see that kindness isn't weakness, that honesty isn't naive, that one choice, just one, can change more than you know." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, a bird sang from the oak tree that had shaded the driveway all those years ago. Then the young man spoke. "I didn't think it was a big deal." "It wasn't," Dr. Whitmore said with a small smile. "That's what made it real." Over the next few weeks, something quiet began to grow. The doctor's grandson started helping out, first by walking the dog with the young man, then volunteering at the community center, then organizing a summer reading club for younger kids. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just showing up, and in watching him, the young man saw himself not as he was now, but as he'd been back then, unsure, ordinary, just trying to do the right thing without knowing where it would lead. One evening, as they sat on the porch shelling peas for dinner, a chore his mom insisted still mattered, even in the age of grocery delivery, the grandson asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't returned those glasses?" The young man thought for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "but not in the way you think. I don't wonder about the cars or the scholarship. I wonder, what if I'd walked past them? What if I'd thought not my problem?" He looked out at the street, the same street where he'd once scuffed his shoes and dreamed of a future he couldn't name. "I think I'd still be the same person, but I'd carry that little weight, the kind you don't notice until it's gone." The grandson nodded slowly. "So, It's not about the reward. It's about who you become.